what am I doing in my job that can be streamlined, that can be automated, that I can spend my time on other higher priority things.
How do you advise people or recommend people view their past experiences, their past roles that may not seem like they align initially?
Really bring it back to the skills. I am extremely resourceful. I'm adaptable. I have applied this in this way that I could see fitting here.
But what we have done today is we're bringing on Alison of Mark Taylor Consulting to talk about that, how you advance your career in our industry.
I'm Alison Sallitt. I am our director at Mark Taylor of Consulting, Communications, and Project Manager. So I have a career mostly in corporate communications and project management.
One of the things that I've experienced is understanding like positive and negative energy and kind of how to approach that.
If you can understand their perspective, then you know what motivates them and you know what goals they're trying to accomplish, and then you can adjust to meet those.
And welcome to Beyond Rent. Finding a career path and being viewed as a leader is a common desire among many people that I know, and probably yourself as well. Podcasts just like this one are a great way to learn about our industry so you can advance your career. And so what we have done today is we're bringing on Alison of Mark Taylor Consulting to talk about that, how you advance your career in our industry. So Alison, welcome to Beyond Rent.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to talk about this topic today.
Yeah, it's a great topic, and everyone thinks about this, right? Where they're at in their job, their role, their career, and how they make the most of it, how they have impact, and how they impact their own personal lives as a result of that. So I'm excited to learn more. It's something I think about, so I'm going to be taking lots of notes as we discuss today. But before we get into the topic, let's make sure our audience knows who you are. So go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us what you're all about.
Sure. I'm Alison Sallitt. I am our director at Mark Taylor of Consulting, Communications, and Project Manager. So for short, just director of Consulting Communications. So I oversee a few of our newer departments here, including our consulting division, which basically brings some of our internal services that have been only in property management out to clients such as lead generation, lead management, and we'll get more into it. But I do a variety of things here and work in the Mark Taylor corporate office.
Excellent. And what's been your path so far? We'll talk about careers to get to where you're at. Are you somebody that's been in property management for a long time, or is this world a little bit new to you?
I'm a bit of a newer one to the multifamily industry. However, I have a career mostly in corporate communications and project management, and specifically in healthcare, most recently before this. I came over to Mark Taylor about 3 years ago and entered the multifamily industry for the first time. I was also coming from Maryland to Arizona, so the area was just very different. Right here in Arizona, there's a lot of growth happening, especially in the past 3 years here in the multifamily industry. And it's a time where it's really advancing. So with that, there was a ton of opportunity to really get involved in, a lot of problems to be solved, and a lot of things, came together along with the right mindset that really helped move my career forward. But I had that foundational expertise in corporate communications, communication strategy, and project management, and was able to apply a lot of those principles here.
That's great. And I think that's part of what we'll talk about today is how you use different experiences along the way. So I'm excited to learn more about what that looks like for you. So let's go and jump into the conversation. So when I think about my own personal career path and all the things I've done in the past and the things that went well, maybe the things that didn't go so well along the way, it wasn't a direct path at all, right? It kind of is a winding path for many people. So let's maybe start there. And when you think about the multifamily industry specifically, where's kind of the starting point that most people have for multifamily?
I think the most important thing that I was aware of and that I focused on when I first got in this industry was learning about it specifically. It is a unique industry, but just having that industry awareness and industry knowledge was really helpful for me. So, for example, going to conferences when I had the opportunity to, and hearing different people speak from different points of views, whether it's the vendor, the client, or the property manager, just all the different people that are involved and how they work together. I think when you build that foundational industry awareness, that's really important. And then when you understand your organization and you build that organizational awareness, that's the next layer of it. And understanding, okay, where does my organization fit within that industry space? And what business needs and what problems are we trying to solve? And where do we need to innovate? Where do we need to advance? When you understand those two layers, then you can relate it to you personally and say, okay, here's where I fit in. Here's where my different skills can help solve those problems. Because when you think about it, just from a personal angle, and you say, what can the company do for me? That's not going to get you as far as if you think about what can I do for the organization, because that ultimately does benefit you. And you kind of have to put your CEO cap on, I say. If you're the president of our company is John, and if you're John, what things are you trying to do for the company, and what's going to ultimately help us reach our goals, and how that fits into the industry. So really taking that bird's eye view has been extremely helpful, and I would recommend it to other people.
Yeah, and I almost feel like there's an equation that you were speaking of there, or building blocks, maybe another metaphor that you could use, and understanding the industry and then your organization and then yourself. And when you add those up, you kind of equal success, or maybe equal a career path. And so for that industry knowledge, not everyone gets the opportunity to go out and travel and hear people speak and have that industry level exposure. So their only view is kind of within their own organization. So how do you get outside of that box and view the industry for what it is? Because it's much bigger than what's happening at any individual property management company.
That's a great question. And I think that we have podcasts like these. We have those online resources. You have different things like organizations like the Arizona Multifamily Housing Organization Association, where they hold education sessions. You have a lot of different resources that are online. You have different conferences you can attend virtually. It's really out there and waiting to tap into if you're willing to do it. I would also say, find someone. It doesn't have to be a mentor, but you can just talk to people within your organization that have been there for a while. I think what's also cool about the multifamily industry is, people tend to stay, once they find it. So you have a lot of people who have maybe started at leasing consultant and worked their way up. Our president, as well as our vice president of operations, have both been here since they were in their 20s and leasing consultants. So if you really listen and, shadow where you can to the people within your organization and absorb that knowledge, that is key. I think sometimes you underestimate, I can just turn to this person over here and talk to them about it instead of trying to figure it out myself. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. You can really learn from the people around you and the resources that you have online. You just have to have that resourceful mindset to go get it.
Yeah, and that's a great tip. And I think we all overlook that a little bit when we look around of what resources we do or don't have. And that's such a great point, that there are people that have been in this industry for a long time, multiple years, multiple decades. And what I have found is many of them are wanting to share. They want to take their past experiences and pass it on to other people so those people can find success. So I totally agree with that. Now, and you talked about a little bit within your own organization as well there. What does that look like? Because kind of the same idea, people can get a little hyper-focused on their own role, their own success, and getting the task done and doing a good job at their current role, that sometimes they kind of miss what's happening around them. How do you balance both? Because if you don't do a good job at your current role, you could be looked down upon, or maybe not get good performance reviews and things like that could hold you back.
Yeah. My biggest piece of advice for that, juggling all those things, learning while you're doing your tasks, is prioritization. So with anything, knowing what is priority, what needs to have a quick turnaround, what's important to your stakeholders, and knowing what could wait, and then almost over communicating that. So if, say, you have two things that need to be done by end of week, one is coming from, say, the president, and one is coming from, is a manager who, was flexible on the timeline, something like that. It's understanding okay, this is really top priority. And maybe I can talk to this person and say, hey, is there any flexibility on this timeline? I had an urgent need come up. Is early next week. Does that work for you? And so being able to juggle that in a way where you're always making your partners feel like their needs are important is definitely a task that takes learning. But my biggest thing is just pose as a question, have open communication, and know how to prioritize. And if you're using your time in the most efficient manner, and you're not maybe spending a ton of time on a task that maybe is not important or maybe doesn't make that big of an impact, then you all of a sudden have more time and you can use it more wisely. And then you can carve out that time for higher learning. So for example, with our project management team, one of the teams I oversee, we are encouraging each other. I want them all to get their CAPM, which is their Certified Associate in Project Management, and then their PMP. And I think those are those foundational building blocks that really help them specialize in their job, and carving out that time to say, hey, this is really worth it. Take an hour every Thursday, prioritize that, because ultimately that's going to help you more than some of the smaller tasks. So really taking the time to invest in yourself and use your time very wisely. Another thing I will say is protect your scope of work. So I think earlier in my career, especially in communications, communication can be anything, right? It can be any email, it can extend to anything, but then it also can be those really important organizational changes, employee engagement things that you want to prioritize. So protecting your scope and knowing exactly where you should be working, where you should be useful, maybe talking to your supervisor and saying, hey, I think that my time is best spent over here, but I'm getting all these lower level requests. Where would you like me to split it? I recommend it's over here, is helpful. So prioritization and over communication and protecting your scope would be the three biggest things.
Yeah, protecting your scope is such an interesting concept, because naturally I think sometimes the more you do, the more you take on, the more you're valued, but that's not always the case, right? And so it kind of fits in with, creating priority and understanding what brings value, how you bring the most value. One of the things that we actually do here is we ask, as part of our annual review with our staff, how are they underutilized in their current role, or as really just what are their skill sets, right? So it gives the opportunity to say, well, I'm actually really good at this, but I'm not doing it right now. Can I go do that? Right? It's kind of asking for that permission to maybe expand the scope of work, but at the same time, you need to be careful that you don't get stretched too thin.
Exactly. An important question that we always ask in our teams with any of them is, at the end of everything, what can be automated about my job? And I think that's an important question that we need to start asking, because of course, automations and AI aren't a replacement, but if we're not using them, then we're behind. So what am I doing in my job that can be streamlined, that can be automated, that I can spend my time on other higher priority things? I think that needs to be incorporated in the conversation as well.
I always love the use of technology, that's for sure. So, and earlier you talked about understanding kind of where the organization is headed and what's important maybe to the CEO, kind of putting on their hat or kind of walking a day in their shoes. One of the things that I often wonder is when somebody is working in their current role, if they're taking on the challenging parts of the job, what's your advice there? Because it's one thing to get really good at what you do, but it's another thing to maybe solve a really complex issue that other people haven't figured out quite yet.
I have seen, just in my experience, in some organizations, there is always a group of problems that people avoid. And I would say that is sometimes a natural reaction, like, oh, that can't be solved, or, oh, this is a hurdle that we don't want to touch, or I don't want to get into that. So a balance of protecting your scope, but also if you see a problem that is a large business need that needs to be solved, don't avoid it, attack it, and don't be scared to dive into that, and know that your hard work will go somewhere if you're picking the right things. So when you're your best advocate, so you need to see where the challenges are and what will challenge you in your role. I would really advise you, not to sit back and wait to be asked to take on something challenging, to see it and say, hey, can I get involved in that in any way? Or I have some ideas for that. Is there any way I can support it? And sometimes that is rare because people's natural instinct is to say, oh, that's a problem I'm going to avoid. So if you're the person that's doing the opposite, that's only going to help you.
Yeah, I think we should challenge ourselves to do hard things. And I really appreciate the fact that you added in there to ask for permission to go do that work. I think we've all worked with somebody that has a lot of energy, they have a lot of excitement around something, but they kind of go rogue sometimes and want to do their own thing. And as an organization, that's really dangerous, right? Because you want to know who's doing what, you want problems solved, but some people want to kind of control the priority of things. So I love that you layered that in. Is that something you've learned over time, that you have kind of witnessed other people not asking for permission? What kind of led you to that, I guess, insight?
Well, I think sometimes, through trial and error and through watching other people, if you expend a lot of energy in a direction that maybe is not aligned with your goals, whether it's your team, your organization, whatever it is, then that energy doesn't end up proving to have a ton of value. So if you communicate with other people, understand their goals, for example, if you're an internal department and communication is doing something different from training that's not feeding into their goals, like you need to be moving in the same direction. So communicating and aligning with people's goals is really helpful. But I think there's always times where we've gone on a tangent or a side quest that like maybe isn't the best use of our time. And so if you're bouncing back and forth and understanding, okay, what's important to the people that I support, then you can better understand what should be important to you. And you can bring up that conversation. I encourage people to be the one to bring it up, but it's also like you want to listen to, right? You want to understand like, okay, maybe this is important to me, but it's not important to the organization right now, or it's not important to the stakeholders that I'm trying to serve. It needs to be aligned for you to successfully create value.
Yeah, that's great. And we spoke earlier, and you mentioned this idea of leveraging past experience and skills, and you have experienced that, right? You've been able to take what you learned in communications and kind of leverage that and move into some different roles. How do you advise people or recommend people view their past experiences, their past roles that may not seem like they align initially? How do you take those and make them fit into a future opportunity?
It's more of a skill-based view instead of direct experience. I think I look at this with hiring too. If you hire for the skills and for the qualities in a person, then they can learn different things. The same as, I learned more about multifamily from, taking the resourcefulness and the, communication skills and the strategic mindset that I have. I think that I would encourage people to focus on that. So say you're hiring or say you're getting interviewed and people ask you, hey, your experience doesn't directly align with this. Really bring it back to the skills. Like, I am extremely resourceful. I'm adaptable. I have applied this in this way that I could see fitting here, and focus on the skills, because it's so much easier to pick the right person and train them for the role than to maybe pick the wrong person who doesn't have the specific skills for that role and maybe has experience. So
Yeah, I think that's great. Tying it back to the skills, and I kind of mentioned earlier, I feel like my career path kind of took some turns along the way, so a winding road, not a straight path. But I think a lot of people, when they look back, they actually see the building blocks. That hindsight being 2020, you can kind of see the building blocks, and that's always exciting. So I also want to learn from you today a little bit more about this idea of being seen as a leader. I think we've all heard this idea that you can lead from anywhere in an organization, that it's more about mindset and how you position things. What's been your experience about people that are positioning themselves as a leader within the organization or even within the industry?
I think it starts with the small things. So say you're in a role where you think, oh, I might not be getting the visibility that I want. It starts with nailing the small things. So one piece of advice that I give everyone is be prepared. It doesn't take any talent. It doesn't take any level of leadership to be prepared. So if you're speaking about something, if you're attending a meeting, already know what is going on moving into it. So you shouldn't be walking in a meeting almost ever without knowing what the agenda is. If you're not creating it, ask someone who ever created it. And then you should think about, okay, if the agenda is X, Y, and Z, how does that apply to me and what value can I bring there? And think of it ahead of time. Or what questions do I have to ask to learn more information, and think of it ahead of time. That is something that I feel really strongly about, because it doesn't matter who you are. If you think about things beforehand and you're prepared, then you're just so much better off, and people see that you're thoughtful and impactful and they want to bring you into the conversation. And I would also say, know when to speak up, but don't be afraid to. Again, another balance. Your opinion is important, and don't doubt your expertise. But also, if you know that it's not a moment where this is your area of expertise, you probably don't need to add something just to add something. So it's really reading the room and being very self-aware is a great tip for me. So I would say being prepared, being self-aware are two things that, will be helpful no matter what level you are on, no matter what conversation you're in, and they build trust with the leaders around you. And eventually that trust turns into more responsibility.
That word trust is so important. I think when I think about trust, I think about not only inside an organization, but also with our customers, with our clients. When you build trust with somebody, it's really hard to break that. And that's where you kind of start building a little more, I think, confidence around things as well. Now, and you also mentioned self-awareness. So what does that look like for you? How have you maybe developed that? Because I feel like that's actually a skill that a lot of people don't have initially, and you kind of develop that over time where you become more aware of kind of who you are and how you act and maybe even how you talk to people, how you treat people. What are some tips around becoming more self-aware?
I would say it starts with asking questions. So, sometimes people struggle with giving feedback, or maybe it's an uncomfortable conversation, but you can always say, even at the end of the meeting, is there anything else that you wanted to cover? Is there anything else that you need from me? How else can I support this? Does this work for you? Just simply phrasing things as questions instead of saying, great, thanks for meeting, goodbye. It's like, is there anything else that you needed here? And that really gives them the opportunity to say, actually, I needed more of this and you gave me this. And that clarification in a really just sort of non-confrontational way helps so much. And it helps you clearly accomplish what the other person wants you to accomplish. So really asking questions, and that extends to management and everything, right? So something that you should be asking, say you have one-on-ones with an employee of yours, is there anything else you need from me? Anything you need that you're not getting? How are you feeling? Just asking questions. I think we sometimes forget to ask those intentional questions, and then really listening. So, and not getting defensive. If someone gives you a piece of feedback, they say, I think that, I could have used more guidance on this. Say, okay, what type of guidance? And then, next time, do you feel like you have enough guidance? And really carry it through and listen. I think that, it can feel like some people are blindsided by pieces of feedback if they're not being self-aware and if they're not paying attention. So I would say do that for yourself, but then also ask the questions. You never want to be surprised by something, and you want to know where you stand.
Yeah, I love that tip to continue to ask questions at the end of the meeting that are very just kind of open-ended, allowing them to speak their mind, give input, or maybe ask that challenging question or give that challenging feedback that they were afraid to give, because now there's this moment where they've been given permission to give that feedback. And it might be about you, and it might be an opportunity for you to learn and become a little more self-aware. I think it's definitely an element of maturity in somebody's life, but also their career, when they start craving that feedback and asking more open-ended questions. I think at least for again, myself, early in my career, I don't think I was as open to those pieces of feedback, but you learn to accept them because growth can come through those areas. So, and when I think at like the industry view, you talked about like getting out in the industry, going to trade shows, that can be really intimidating. And so when I think about like leadership, how does it look to develop yourself as a leader within an industry with thousands and thousands of people, lots of different roles, people that have been there for a long time, where maybe you're newer? How do you insert yourself in that place where you don't feel intimidated and you feel like you can build up your leadership skills there too?
Number one, a tip that I would say is be authentic. You can tell if someone's faking it. So I think, obviously be authentic, but if you're not being yourself, then that's going to shine through. You got to be intentional about putting yourself out there, but you have to be genuine while you do that. Personally, something I'm passionate about is I'm more of an introverted person on that scale of introvert to extrovert, and knowing like that's okay. And I build really strong one-on-one relationships, small group relationships. So I'm intentional about being authentic and putting myself in those situations where it's like, like let's connect with this person and be intentional about meeting with them one-on-one or learning more about them and opening up in that way. Not everyone is the same type of leader, and that's okay, because I think someone will respect you much more if you are yourself and you're vulnerable and you're confident. than if you're trying to be this kind of one size fits all box. You know, you don't have to be the loudest person in the room to be the leader in the room is something I feel very strongly about.
Yeah, and that directly connects back to what you said earlier, that there's just moments where you don't need to speak up. You need to let others speak, right? You don't have to be the loudest voice in the room. And, a lot of times that can be off-putting for some people when they feel like somebody is being overly aggressive or trying to dominate a conversation, especially knowing that there's extroverts and introverts and all types of different personalities in there to find people that you can connect with. So I think that's a good way to view it. And one of the things that I've experienced in kind of my life is understanding like positive and negative energy and kind of how to approach that. And I think no matter what organization you're in, there are those challenges. So I'd imagine as somebody that's advocating for leadership and so forth, you probably have more of a positive mindset yourself, and you probably help others find that. How do you do that maybe in a space where you're feeling like you're actually getting a lot of no's and negativity?
I try and think about the fact that it's all about perspective. So, you know, whether you're disagreeing with someone on a specific issue or you're talking to a client and maybe something's not landing well, if you can understand their perspective, then you know what motivates them and you know what goals they're trying to accomplish. And then you can adjust to meet those. So if you're only thinking about, again, tunnel vision, like your goals, then you might not be striking the right chord with whoever you're talking to. So it's something I really learned from communications, because when you're writing on a channel or to a target audience, you need to understand, okay, what does this person care about? How does it impact them? Because that's immediately what they're looking for. You know, we have so much noise that they need to understand how it impacts them, and they need to understand that quick, and that it translates to interpersonal communication too. And it needs to be about, accomplishing what you both want and connecting those shared goals. And if you can put yourself in those shoes and understand their perspective, understand whatever pressures or challenges or hurdles, what actually benefits them, and what they're responding to, then that's how you accomplish things together.
Yeah, in that perspective of putting that other person first and maybe putting their not interests first necessarily, but at least understanding where their interests are, so you can find that common ground and start working through that. I think it's really important. A lot of people that work in our industry would say this industry is great. A lot of people grow a good career here, but it can be stressful. It can be very stressful, especially if you are like you talked about, like leasing agents and property managers, on-site staff members. If you're even on the investor side or the development side, there's all types of things going on. It can be very stressful, which can bring out some negativity. So if you can be the voice of reason and find that common ground, I think that's really smart. And I think that's really what we're probably called to be as leaders as well. So let's shift a little bit and talk more about Mark Taylor Consulting specifically. So when we think about what you're providing as far as a consulting firm, what are some of the key areas where you step in and really are helping people as it even relates to some of what we've talked about today?
That's actually a perfect segue, because, what we've identified recently with consulting, and, we consult on with owners and clients throughout the asset management life cycle. So whether it's pre-development, marketing and branding, public relations, if you just want to get on a call with us and talk about property management, really anything. And then we also are a property manager, but we offer those advisory services outside of it. But what we've really realized that people are struggling with today is that whole process of bringing a tenant to residency. So the whole marketing, lead management, lead generation process is something that people are struggling with, and understanding, how much should I be spending on marketing, advertising? Am I actually reaching my target audience? Is this landing with the right people, especially in more of a renter's market? You have to make sure that's locked in, or else you can just turn on the spending and spend as much as you want and maybe not get the results that you're looking for. And then with lead generation, it's a big problem that, some people don't answer the phones simply. And then those tenants move on. And it's really that combination of having your lead generation and lead management locked in. And that's what we've most recently been providing with a service called Tenant Source. So we've realized okay, from their perspective, this is a real business need that, they're trying to manage their community and they're trying to bring in leads and trying to manage the marketing, and maybe they're spending way too much over here. We basically do the entire marketing strategy, set up the website, things like that. And then our concierge team is doing all the digital communication, and they just book tours right on schedule. So that is kind of the latest need that we have come to form through consulting by understanding that audience's perspective.
Yeah, and that really is a need in the space. And when we think about all the different things that a property management or owner is trying to accomplish, one of the most important ones is making sure that they have renters, right? That there's residents in those spaces. But it's a complex world. And when I look out and when I go to trade shows and when I think about our industry, the options that are out there for advertising and marketing and lead generation, it's really challenging to even know where to start. And so I think a lot of people kind of get lost in that. And we even now have opportunities where there's more technology than ever before to leverage. So there's all these different opportunities. So it's good to hear that that's kind of where you're headed and that's where you're thinking about, because I think people want to find, I would say, streamlined processes to kind of fill in and solve for that. So because that really probably isn't their strongest capability if they're in the property management space.
No, and it's having those specialized experts figure it out for you instead of you wasting effort on it. If you're, have been in development your whole life, or if you've been in property management your whole life, maybe marketing is not something you're as familiar with, or maybe it's more worth it for you to save on expenses and outsource the beginning half of that. And just think about managing your residents and managing your community and not bringing people in and not worry about vacancies and things like that. So we think that by having these specialized roles where we really know how to drive people to residency, that it will really help many people out.
Yeah. And I think it ties back to your comment about self-awareness. I have found that many people think that marketing isn't that complicated. It's, we're going to put some ads together, we're going to build a website, things like that. But it is complex, right? And to have the self-awareness that maybe that isn't the area where you are the strongest, and so you bring in others, I think that's just, again, ties right back to your earlier comment.
Yeah, and particularly marketing for multifamily is unique. There's a few different things that you can do, and that there's also things you can waste money on, save money on. So just knowing that space very specifically that we've been in for 40 years is just even more specialized than just general marketing knowledge.
Absolutely. So as we kind of turn the corner and wrap up this episode, I want to make sure that our audience has an opportunity to find ways to learn more. So if they want to catch up with what you're working on or Mark Taylor Consulting is working on, what's the best way for them to learn more?
They can simply contact us at consulting@mark-taylor.com or visit our website and fill out a form, and we'll get in touch, and you'll pretty much go right to me and my team for consulting, and we'll understand your business needs, kind of have a discovery meeting, and then see if we can help you. And particularly if you have struggles with bringing in leads to your community, that's really where we can help you out and drive them to residency with Tenant Source. So reach out via email or on the website, and we're available.
Excellent. Well, I really appreciate your time and giving all those insights on what people can do to really grow their career, be seen as a leader in our space. We need more people to stay in this industry and really develop themselves as leaders. So I appreciate all of your time today. And thank you to our audience for joining us for another episode. And until next time, keep going beyond rent.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Beyond Rent. If you enjoyed this podcast, spread the word on social media and with your peers in the industry. To be notified when more episodes are released, subscribe using your favorite podcast player. Beyond Rent is brought to you by Rent Manager Property Management Software. Learn more about Rent Manager's industry-leading software solutions at rentmanager.com. Until next time, keep going beyond rent.